Thank you. All right, it's Monday, January 7th, and we will be holding our Administrative Personnel Affairs Committee, and I will ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Alderman Karen.
Here.
Alderwoman Kelly.
Here.
Alderman Wilshire is here. Alderman Lopez. Alderman Gidge.
Here.
We have a quorum. Also in attendance is Alderman at Large Mike O'Brien.
Thank you, and it was 7 p.m. we called the roll. Okay, we'll start off with public comment. There's no one in the audience, so there's none. Communications?
I move to suspend the rules to accept a communication that was on our desk this evening from John Griffin regarding recommendation to increase the threshold for each Finance Committee item from $10,000 to $25,000. My motion is to suspend the rules to accept that communication.
Okay. Any comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Applications to license hawkers, peddlers, vendors?
None.
Okay, appointments by the mayor?
None.
Unfinished business?
None.
New resolutions?
None.
New business ordinance?
We have ordinance 18030. The prime sponsor is unable to be here this evening, so I would move to table.
Okay. Any questions to table 0-18030? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll table that to our February meeting. Thank you.
Ordinance 18031, increasing the purchasing threshold for Finance Committee approval from $10,000 to $25,000. I will make a motion to recommend final passage of ordinance 18031.
Okay, you heard the motion, and we have CFO John Griffin here to speak on this, but we would like to hear from the primary sponsor, Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair,
Thank you.
and good evening to other members of the Personnel Administration Affairs Committee. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you this evening 0-18031, which would increase the purchasing threshold for Finance Committee approval from $10,000 to $25,000. A little bit of history on this. At one time, from what I understand, the city did have a $15,000 threshold. It was brought back and repealed. The last time that this bill was looked at was in the year 2002, according from what some of my research is. I think we all can agree since 2002, the interest rates or the inflation rate has gone up 2.10%. So something in $10,000 in 2002 is now worth, at 2018, $13,951. Now, looking at this, increasing from $10,000 to $25,000 may seem a big increase, but really, when you look at the inflation rate, it is not. Most of this money has already been budgeted by our division heads. This empowers our division heads, who are already, like I say, through their budgets, have come out with this, and it's basically for the purchases. The last finance meeting that we had last week, I duly noted that 6 items were under the $10,000 limit. You were just above, but would be 6 of them would be under the $25,000, which left us only 5 out of the 11. So therefore, it seems to be good. I'm going to let Mr. Griffin explain the more technical, but I feel comfortable in empowering our division heads. It is a budget item, and there are people, the comptrollers will be watching this as well. So I think this will just expedite. And also, too, I got to mention, there's a lot of work that goes in to approving those financial records that comes up that is presented to the Finance Committee. This will expedite that. And if there's emergency purchases that need to be made or on the quick, this can easily be done. So I think it's an efficiency within our government. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien. Just let the record show that Alderman Lopez has joined the committee at 7:03. Thank you. Mr. Griffin?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Early this evening, as the clerk indicated, I passed out a multi-page document that included a memo that I had drafted several months ago. In addition, there's a grid sheet for the thresholds that are in our other cities and towns in New Hampshire, as well as an analysis of the past 3 fiscal years to include 16, 17, and 18. Again, this isn't a request to take any guidelines that have been passed by ordinance for our purchasing department and our other divisions. This is simply trying to eliminate traditional purchases that are less than 25,000 that are, as Alderman O'Brien indicated, budgeted. So this is a situation where everything's budgeted. Everything has a funding source that comes to, identified funding source that comes to the Finance Committee. And in analyzing some of the other cities and towns, some cities and towns like Manchester and Concord, they don't have a Finance Committee. What the Finance Committee's charged with is making sure that the purchasing department under the mayor and my direction and control the purchasing items, goods and services per the ordinances. So we're not changing that. We're still going to have bids. Any bid that's in excess of 10,000 will still have competitive bids and procurement. It's simply a situation that where since I've been here since 2010, it's a situation where there is a great deal of effort that takes place to prepare the documents. And there is some timing differences in getting those documents approved, especially with the Department of Public Works, where they have to first go to the Board of Public Works and then come to Finance. And then if it's over $1 million, obviously, we'll still be filing those, and that gets full board approval. So what you have in front of you is my memo, the threshold analysis, and to kind of add some statistics to the, to an Exhibit B, it is true that 30% of the purchases are less than 25,000. It's pretty consistent. And it represents 2 to 4% of the cost of all of the items that have come forth. So traditional purchases such as fire department equipment, turnout gear. The favorite of everybody is the 4th of July fireworks. That will not be coming, but we can still revel in that event. But those types of purchases would not be coming before the Finance Committee, but certainly could be discussed and germane to any budgetary discussions from the Budget Review Committee, both during the year and as well as they review the proposed budget from the mayor. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from committee members? Alderwoman Kelly.
Thank you. I'll likely ask this question again at finance, but I just wanted to know if you could explain a little more how the cities that say they have no, how that works. And
Just looking at that Exhibit A, if I might, and focusing on Manchester. So they have a threshold for requiring bids of 25,000, whereas ours is still 10. But as noted here, and this was information that Mr. Kuchen received from his counterparts at the various cities and towns. As long as purchasing follows their guidelines, which is 3 quotes between 1,000 and 10,000, and bids or RFPs for items over 10, they are free to expend the budget as the budget allows. So, so again, in their springtime, they're going through their budget process, and the Board of Aldermen are approving their budget. Whatever's included in there, whatever representation of what those dollars are to be spent on, if they can, as long as they follow their purchasing guidelines, there's no body that's approving the spend. We have an extra layer of review, which is the Finance Committee, that's charged to making sure that the city is following its purchasing guidelines, and that's what the purchasing manager is responsible for. So when you see all the communications, or most of them, they're from Mr. Kuchen, purchasing manager, and he lays out how we procured the goods and services. So he's representing to you that we followed the ordinances. So it's not really a budgeting control review. It's more Mr. Kuchen attesting that it was procured properly for all the goods and services. So those that are over 25,000, Still trying to explain, here's the funding source, sometimes it's multiple funding sources, here's how we bought it, either sealed bid, competitive bid, or professional service procurement. So that's how, I don't want anybody to think that there isn't people watching what we're buying, but it's really on the front end of preparing the documents, which does take time, for what would be considered a typical expenditure that's included in virtually every budget. So that's, hopefully that explains a little bit of what happens. I know there is oversight. I'm not representing that any of these other cities and towns aren't as diligent in their procurement practices as this city is, but it's their level of comfort through their ordinances that we were able to get this information.
It's helpful, thank you.
Anyone else? I have a question for you. When you talked about Public Works Commission, are they going to change their threshold for final approval, or is that still going to stay the same?
I will check on that, but I believe that the reason why they're approving at the 10,000 level is because of the city ordinances. So I think because the DPW departments aren't going to create any documents for anything less than 25,000, there wouldn't be anything to approve. So their tradition is to file it with the threshold as the ordinance states in for the entire city. But I will check to make sure that they're not going to be presenting anything. That's the whole purpose of them wanting and strongly suggesting that we move forward with this.
Okay, thank you. Alderwoman Kelly.
Thank you. This is a little bit of a out there question in terms of your direct knowledge, but I'd like to know if you have any idea of how many man hours goes into preparing the documents, what we might be saving the city.
There's a lot of folks that get involved in the generation of the creation of an item that comes before the Finance Committee, and it begins with the department that's purchasing the good or service. That information is captured, explained, and transmitted to the purchasing director. Purchasing manager, he puts information together. I review any and all items that go on the Finance Committee agenda once under the leadership of the mayor, and then before the Finance Committee meets, there's a fair amount of work put together to get all the information necessary for the legislative manager, Ms. Lovering, to send it to the Finance Committee and the other board members in the packet. So it's I couldn't say is it an hour and a half total, but there's a lot of hands that go into the calculation. Now, as far as it's not, if it doesn't go to the finance, there's still a lot of work that takes place. They're still procuring the goods and services. They just don't need to stop what they're doing, write the memo to Mr. Kukin that he attaches to his memo of how he bought the goods and services. So there's going to be a time savings. There's going to be probably efficiency in the fact that if somebody really wants to purchase something, whether it's police department, fire department, or other departments, they can get it with the 3 bids or the 3 quotes, and then or the bidding process, and order it. There wouldn't be a wait. That might be the most efficient savings that we would have.
If I could follow on.
You may.
My understanding would be that it would also cut down on people being at the committee meetings themselves. So a lot of times division directors are here to explain the expenditures.
That would be true. As you've seen, there could be a discussion amongst the Finance Committee members on an item that's less than 20, greater than 10 and less than 25, but predominantly that time might be better served talking about items with greater than 25. It is, and the hope is that we spend more time providing the information, especially when it comes to wastewater. There's a lot of unknowns that it's a tough department and operation, and it's expensive. but I must say, having been here since 2010, and the comments from the mayor and others, that it's a well-run operation. It just needs a lot of work. Things Go was built, I think, in the 70s, and we're way beyond the normal useful life of some of the components. So that's what you're seeing. You're seeing multi-million-dollar bids, and then, or finance items, and then you're seeing change orders that aren't resulting from a mistake in the original bid. They result from more and better information from the vendor that's getting either inside the tanks, or they take all the water out and take a look at things, so that's where the change orders come in. So it's best efforts to get the bids out from an engineering perspective, but also there's changes so that the finance committee would have time. I mean, they have time, they're here for all the items anyway, but that's an area that tends to get a lot of discussion.
Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin, probably it'd be better if I may lead you into a question. Can you say, by giving this authority, raising from 10,000 to 25,000, can you just go through the process of your job as a comptroller, looking at all this and making sure that the money is spent appropriately and the same safeguards are there for the taxpayer that occurs? Can you just go over the process, please? And I think that would make some
Sure.
understanding.
Certainly. So the budget is set at the beginning of the fiscal year. The budget is set to procure goods and services. So as the year goes forward, the operating divisions and departments, if they know what the value is, they know what the funding source is, so that's critical. The representation when it comes to finances, there's a funding source. There's also a representation that is procured properly. So when the finance managers generally report to me through a document called Request for Finance, I get that document, and along with that document is the information for me to affix my signature on the bottom of that form to allow Mr. Kuchen to put it on the Finance Committee agenda. So there's a lot of oversight from the financial managers, from the division directors, the department heads, et cetera. So that, we're not changing any of that. That process is going to happen anyway. Can't overspend the budget. You need a funding source to buy something. You need either a contract or a purchase order to purchase things. So that oversight will still take place. We watch the budgets diligently monthly. We publish financial statements on our website. We review items that may need some increase in funding, things of that nature, and we try to secure the funding and come through the Board of Aldermen when necessary to get that funding. So it's really an administrative thing, I would think. That's, if you sum it up, it's administrative efficiencies, and a $15,000 item 15, 20 years ago is worth more now. You would use the 2.1% inflation factor over the last 18 years, but that's kind of the reality of it at this point. So I think it's a comfortable number, and a number that we don't take lightly. We thought that might be the best way. And then exhibits C, D, and E basically are very small print, but they show every single item that's come before the Finance Committee, and you can kind of see by the definition or the explanation of what it is. It would clearly show fireworks, 16,000. Clearly show paving, 4.5 million. And as I mentioned, the sum of all of those, the 30% of items that we wouldn't have to prepare documents for represents 2 to 4% of the total spend. So you're capturing, good news is you're still capturing and seeing contracts that are over 25,000. So hopefully that explains a little bit about, the same protections are in. We're not asking for any relief there at all. We go with the same ordinances that have been in existence for quite some time on the procurement side and the funding, the fund accounting side as well.
Alderman Lopez.
It kind of stuck out to me when I was reading the handout that if 30% of the expenditures only represent 2% or so of the actual expense, and that's a pretty disproportionate use of our time. So I'm very conscious over these last couple of weeks following the Board of Aldermen's overturn of the mayor's veto of our role, because I had a large number of people say like, how come you disagreed with the mayor? And I was like, it wasn't so much disagreeing with the mayor, so much as doing our job as aldermen. But I had an equal number of people, if not greater, also point out that, at least you did your job, you vetted it, and you showed that as a board, you have your own will. So in that context, I was looking at this and trying to, determine, are we surrendering our role as Board of Aldermen? Are we giving away, some of our responsibilities that we were all elected to do? And if you're spending 30% of your time looking at 2% of your resources, then we're not surrendering our responsibilities. We're actually taking them seriously. I think we should be spending our time focusing on the larger issues and the more important expenditures, and letting the staff that we pay to manage their departments and oversee accountability do that until there's a problem. And I think we have a better chance as a board of identifying any problems or missteps or difficulties if we're not being bogged down by lots of smaller incremental cost items rather than the larger ones.
Anyone else? Okay, two things. First of all, there was a threshold of $15,000, and that got changed for reasons unknown. But I think it's important. You're right. When you're looking at a $4 million wastewater bill, for repairs, you want to spend a lot more time talking about that and how it's going to impact the community rather than a $16,000 fireworks display. I have a question, though. The school board oversees their budget. Do they have a threshold for their finance committee in which they review contracts or purchases?
They do, Madam Chair and members of the committee, they do have a finance and ops committee. And I try to watch it diligently, and Mr. Donovan will bring contracts to them for approval. I don't think they have a threshold, though. I don't think they do, but there is some significant diligence over there on Mr. Donovan and his when he reports up to the subcommittee of the Board of Education, that there's a lot of review.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I don't think their policies and procedures get into how we have it created through ordinance. But
So in other words, they're not reviewing every purchase that's coming through. They're probably looking at the more extensive costs
I
for
would think
the district.
my viewing of their meetings, they're pretty high level, but they do, when there's a contract, they get those recommended for approval, and then the full board would approve contracts. But the spend is what you're talking, like some of these items don't have a contract.
Right.
They're just
That's right.
buying something
Right.
traditionally. But that's a good question as far as the school board. There's significant diligence over there as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, you heard the motion for final approval on 0-18-031. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Okay, motion is passed. Thank you, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Alderman O'Brien. Okay, so we don't have, do we have any discussion? Okay, public comment? No one's here. Remarks by Alderman? Alderman Wilshire.
I just wanted to make the public aware that there was an article in the Telegraph about the rail study being presented to the Board of Aldermen tomorrow night and a discussion. There will be no discussion. The rail study will get its first reading and be sent to a committee. So those of you who are interested in the rail study, stay tuned for when it comes up at the committee level.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Wilshire. Alderman Lopez.
So just to clarify to Madam President, if I raise my hand and try to talk, it will just be pointless. I have a bad habit of that.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez. Okay, no, we're not looking at a non-public session. Do I have a motion? Alderman Wilshire?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned at 7:25 PM. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
See
you.
you tomorrow. Did you want that one?
Am I supposed to make the motion to adjourn?